Good morning. My name is Lillian McEnany, and I am an assistant curator at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. And as you all know, we are here to continue our fantastic lecture series surrounding our current exhibition, Clearly Indigenous Native Visions Reimagined in Glass. Before we begin, I would like to briefly acknowledge the place where this conversation is happening, even though we are in a virtual space and not physically at the museum today, in Ogopoge within the Tewa world. As a non-native person living in so-called Santa Fe, I am a guest in the ancestral homelands of the Tewa people. And I wish to acknowledge all of the Indigenous folks, Pueblo, Dene, Apache, and so many others, past, present, and future, who walk on these lands and steward this place. And I would encourage everybody watching here today to also reflect on the lands in which you are living. So we are so pleased this morning to be joined by Ramson Lomatewama. Ramson is the first and only full-time Hopi glassblower, as well as the traditional Kachina doll carver, jeweler, poet, educator, and consultant. He is going to do a PowerPoint presentation for us today, which will be followed by a discussion and Q&A afterwards. A recording of this program will be made available on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks, so please keep an eye out on our Facebook page and sign up for our monthly newsletter for that link, as well as additional announcements about other upcoming programs. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and share my screen and hand it off.
Okay, good morning. Before I started, I just want to thank the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture for hosting this event. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited about my time here in Santa Fe. I decided to call it Landscapes and Life, Expressions in Glass, simply because I grew up in a culture that has a deep reverence for the earth and the life that's upon it. The Hopi Reservation is in northeastern Arizona, and it is a high desert. The average rainfall can vary from year to year, and currently we're in a drought. We've been in a drought for about the past decade or so, and even living under those conditions, we still continue to have a lot of hope and just continue with carrying on with our daily lives. This gives you an idea of what the landscape is like out on the reservation. And it's, like I said, it's pretty dry. There's a lot of a variety of plant life and everything going on. And it's just a really peaceful and quiet place to live. Our history goes into mythical times as well. And for those of you who aren't very aware of the Hopi mythology, in a nutshell, we believe that there were three worlds that were created and destroyed prior to this one. And the reason why they were created was to perpetuate life. And usually at the beginning of all things, the emergence plays a big role because we believe in the idea of cycles. So when the first, second, and third were created, they were also destroyed in succession. So being aware of this, the people of the third world, which we say is directly along this one, sought escape through climbing up a bamboo reed into the sky. And the bamboo reed emerged somewhere in the Grand Canyon into this fourth world. So the people emerged from that point into this world. And so we regard that this world that we occupy right now is our fourth opportunity to try and not repeat the catastrophic history of the past. So the centerpiece that you see there is quite simple. It symbolizes the Sipa Clinic, which is the emergence point that exists for us somewhere in the Grand Canyon, where the Hopi people were born into this world from their mother, the earth. And I tried to take this piece and replicate the landscape that is in the immediate surroundings of where I live on Third Mesa. So if you look at the other two images, you can see that there are splotches of gray and a yellowish and a dark brown color that actually grows on sandstone. And so with this one, I just tried to replicate the story through the glass art and through the form of the vessel itself. Again, I look at landscapes, I look at rock formations, I look at patterns, stones, whatever that is around me, and I try to translate those into movement. This one I call stillness and movement, because if you look at the upper left-hand picture, this is an area up on the Hopi reservation that we refer to as Dalastima. And the rock formations are very unusual. There's a lot of spherical forms. And then in contrast to that, in extreme southern Utah, there's a place called Wave, which is roughly between Page, Arizona, and Kanab, Utah. And so these really contrasting landscapes are both sandstone. It's essentially the same substance, but the patterns and the colorations are really different. So I took that idea of the stillness, and the center photograph is me in Japan taking a few minutes to just have a short mindfulness exercise. So when I look at this idea of the cycle of life, because it's almost a cliche now, to me, a circle is two-dimensional, whereas life is three-dimensional. So if you look at the lone sphere on the right-hand side, that to me communicates the stillness that's in every one of us. And the external world is full of movement, and sometimes the movement can become very chaotic. But you can see how the patterns on the inner sphere are linked to that photograph on the upper left, and then the bowl where the sphere rests in is linking to the lower left-hand photograph. And so it all connects back to the landscape. It talks about the calmness in the storm. And my personal idea of this is that I can be calm, I can be still, I can go into myself and find that place that we call serenity, and just experience the stillness of it all while the world around me is just moving. It's in constant movement. So for me personally, I may be sick. I may be surrounded with a lot of negativity in the world, but I don't have to contaminate myself with that. So for me, just meditating and doing mindfulness exercises really helps me to just keep a proper perspective and a real perspective on life. This one I call Ancestral Journeys. The glass pieces that you see there that are very colorful have essentially become my signature pieces, because as far as I know, there is no one else, no other native glass artist who is doing this particular form in glass. So when we consider the ancestral journeys of Hopi and other people, we look to our histories and our past. So I have this pictorial called the Holy Ghost Panel. It's in extreme northern Utah in Canyonlands National Park. So there is a story. We do have a connection to these painted images on the cliff walls. And I took that story and the history and the connection that Hopi people have to these images, and I translated them into glass. But because I have the advantage of using colors, I can also communicate not only the form and the story behind it, but also through the colors, communicate ideas of the Hopi values and belief system. So when I do any glass art that involves color, I never do anything just randomly. I always plan it. I always think about the forethought and what exactly do I want to communicate with every individual piece. So I've been doing these spirit figures since 2005, and literally I've probably done thousands of these in the last 16 years. And I can guarantee people that no two ever come out exactly the same. And that's one of the things that makes the beauty and the uniqueness of glass art is not replicating anything, because the glass does, at a certain point, choose what it wants to do outside of my I made several connections here. That of the earth, which we believe is female, corn, which is female, and young ladies in the Hopi tribe who are also the progenitors of life. The land is a progenitor of life. Corn for us is a sacred substance, so it is a progenitor of life. And in the real world, young ladies who are not married, but who are capable of bearing children, are sometimes seen with the hairdo that you see there. We call those butterfly worlds because they look like butterflies that would land on a corn stalk or on a cornfield. So the corn that you see there in the basket represents the four cardinal directions, yellow being the north, blue being the west, red being the south, and white is the east. And every color has an idea or a concept associated with it. So this is the basic understanding that we have of the totality of life and how life is cyclical and how we integrate ourselves into the life cycle by doing the things that we do in everyday life. I used to teach sociology at a small college outside of Chicago called North Central College. It's in Naperville, Illinois. And one thing that I've always tried to communicate and to understand is what compels people to do the things that they do or say the things that they do. And just trying to understand human behavior in terms of the individual, the community, and the society at large. And for Hopi, everything seems to be revolving around corn in one form or the other. So I did this glass piece for the Clearly Indigenous exhibit, which combines all three elements. You have the basic shape of the ear of corn as the body of this corn maiden. You have the corn stalk with 4 ears of corn that are growing upward, and each ear of corn would represent a different cardinal direction. And towards the base, you have a pattern of the earth, and then the hash marks down below towards the very bottom indicate the three prior worlds that existed before this one. And then at the top, of course, you have the butterfly worlds of the young girl that you see in the picture. So I'm trying to show that I understand and have a lot of reverence and respect for the feminine principle in life. Uh, and that's it. I grew up in a fairly traditional home, and in my home, we were taught to respect females. And I guess that's been my approach all my life. Obviously, I've made mistakes here and there, but I try to improve on that. And unfortunately, the reality of the situation with Hopi people today is we do have issues that are more commonplace today than they were maybe 3 or 4 generations ago. So kind of bringing back things to reality is we do have issues of domestic violence, crimes against females, that type of things. So for me, just doing work like this is a constant reminder as to the values and the beliefs that I choose to live by as an individual. So that's kind of my soapbox for the day. I've also been very, very interested in Mimbres culture for the last 35 years or so. There's just some things about that culture that are very mysterious, and it just causes me to think about the images that were brought out and brought to fruition through their ceramics. I've always been a big fan of Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, and Joseph Campbell, with his studies on mythology, gave me new perspectives on the Mimbres culture. Carl Jung, with his ideas on archetypal images and the process of self-actualization, really played into my growing interest in the Mimbres culture. About 3 or 4 years ago, I was invited to participate in a project at the New Mexico State University in Las Cruces, whereby several other Hopi artists and myself came together. We visited some sites, we looked at pottery at a handful of museums, and we came and just brought out what we thought of the art on a personal level as individuals, as members of a culture, as artists. And we did our own interpretations in our own mediums. I did the glass work, we had a jeweler, we had a potter, we had a visual artist, and we had a Cucina doll carver on our team. So we all created something, a work of art that was our reinterpretation of what we felt was the Mimbres culture. So I came up with this corn mate, and this is not a very good photograph of the piece, but if you look at the midsection, you can barely make out the details of a fish that is similar to the one in the bowl to the right of it. And then surrounding the fish are tadpoles, which are symbols of the regeneration of life in Hopi culture. And then if you look a bit into the between the waist and the shoulder area, you see these geometric designs that came from looking at another pottery piece. And of course, at the top, we have the butterfly wings again. This piece was commissioned for a small exhibit through NMSU to kind of bring together the whole project. So this was a really challenging project for me to work with, but it was very, very enlightening. I grew in a lot of different ways. I reconnected with our history as Pueblo people. So I just got a lot out of this project. And my interest in Mimbres culture and Mimbres ceramic work is even stronger today than it was 20 years ago. I like to bring different ideas together and just kind of combine them, like on the Corn Maiden that came about from the Mimbris project. Um, on my travels, and I love to travel, I take photographs of landscapes, of rock formations. I take close-up photographs of patterns in the rocks and the colors, and I try to translate all of that into glass art. So in my travels, every so often you come across these little eddies, these ponds or whirlpools, and that spiral movement, uh, it's just really fascinating. It's very mystical. It's very hypnotizing, and I contrast that with the same imagery after I wash dishes and I watch the water draining down the sink. I mean, it's the same pattern, everything, but the feel is totally different. So I took this idea of the whirlpool and brought in this idea of flower blossoms, and I melded the two together. And so this is a recent series of work that I've done, and I call them whirlpool blossoms. And I just love doing these because, again, glass is unpredictable in the end, and you just get these totally unique shapes. They're not uniform or anything like that, and the variety of the colors and the patterns that you end up with is really mystifying because you never know what you're going to end up with at the end. Is that a stained glass window that's also in the exhibit up at MIAC? And the thing that I really enjoyed about being here in Santa Fe and in New Mexico in general was that MIAC was a project that was and still continues to be to really help me to look to my roots, to my history, to what I've been doing as a glass artist. Because I used to teach sociology. I don't do that anymore. I initially got into stained glass work for a good number of years, but then I crossed paths with glassware, and that really expanded my world. And stained glass went on the back burner for a number of years, but I'm picking it up again. So this particular piece comes to us from a private collection from the Hopi Reservation. And in it, you see a number of things happening. You see the band at the base with the smoky black and the green bars coming up and the sunflower in the middle. That particular design pattern comes to us from what we call a duhi. It's a wedding robe that has embroidered details woven into it. So the sunflower for us is always the beginning of life. The two upright green areas on either side of the sunflower depict the life that is not a part of this world yet, but is awaiting for its arrival here into this fourth world. And the black that you see down below represents the unknown. I don't remember my existence prior to my birth, but there was something going on. I just don't have a recollection of it, other than maybe through dreams or through art being manifested. I may be projecting some of those past experiences prior to my birth into this world in a variety of ways that I may or may not be aware of. The black in the center, most people will see inverted triangles, but for us, that is a corn plant. And it's also talking about the human life that's here today. So one thing that we have in our culture is beauty. Beauty is all around us. It comes to us from different directions. So the butterflies that you see floating around there, around the corn plant, have all the colors of light that we have in our lives today. They're beautiful. They're in movement. And the butterflies are finding nourishment from the earth, the dark band below, but they're also nourishing the corn plant. So if you have a chance, and I don't know if you can see it on the screens here, but these butterflies, if you look at the heads of them, the heads are the four directional colors. There's yellow, blue, red, and white. So this means that beauty is coming to us from all directions, and it's always around us. And the butterflies that I chose to depict here are from Kiba murals that date back for centuries. So the Kiba murals that we see from about the 1200s into the 1700s will depict butterflies or dragonflies in very, very elemental ways. But if you notice also, there's an emerging butterfly coming out of the green band that's on the left of the corn plant. And this is the beauty that's coming into the world. And when we talk about that, we're talking about the future generation, the children that are coming here after us. They're going to bring beauty into the world. And we will focus on our children, focus on their futures so that they are ensured a beautiful life. So this is what the MIAC exhibit has been doing for me. It's been really just helping me look at my life in terms of my own history, my cultural history, my history as an artist and an educator. But I'm not done. I still have time ahead of me. And the Institute of American Indian Arts has afforded me an opportunity through their Artist in Residence program to continue that and to grow with my past experiences. So this is a really good point in my life. I'll be here on the IAIA campus until December the 7th, just growing more in the glass arts. So there are new techniques that I want to try while I'm here, things that I've never tried before. I'm going to try casting bronze to incorporate into the glass art. So I'm a student here as well as an artist in residence. Some of my mentors are the students that are attending here because I've never cast bronze before, but there's a sculpture student here that is going to help me through this process. So I'm being taught by students, which is a really, really good approach. So we're all teachers, we're all mentors in that sense. So I have a lot of respect for the student because he knows things that I don't. And probably vice versa. But for me, the spotlight is on this individual right now. So this is a time for me to grow even more. And even after I die, I'll still be growing, but maybe as an earthworm, and later on maybe as a flower or something. I'm going to still be growing after I kick the bucket. So I just feel that life never ends. There's always something ahead of us. And it's really changed my attitude because I'm dealing with cancer and diabetes right now. But I'm not living in fear of the disease, and I just want to grow to be a better person in general as I continue with my work. So knowing that my time here, with this existence, it's not going to be forever. I've come to understand that if I'm holding anger or resentments, or if I'm sad or depressed, I'm wasting precious time. So, I figured, well, I'm not going to feel that way anymore, because that's a waste of my time. All I want to do is become a better person and be of service to others through my art. So that's the goal that I'm working on right now. And with that, I'll end it here, and I'm very happy to try and answer your questions, or I'd be very happy and interested to listen to your comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. I so appreciate hearing so much about your own personal growth and journey in art. And I have so many questions to ask you, but I'm going to leave it up to the audience to kind of lead the discussion. So while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I think I will selfishly start with one of my own, which is, why and how did you start working in glass? What brought you to this medium, and why does it speak to you specifically?
I was in the process of working towards my undergraduate degree at Goddard College in Plainfield, Vermont, and I spent a few days with a classmate of mine who lived in Cambridge at the time, and he wanted to give me a tour of Boston because I wanted to see the place where the Cheers bar was. So for those of you who remember Cheers, I wanted to see the place, right? So we took the transit system downtown, and we walked around and everything, and we came across this church, and he asked me if I wanted to go in, and I was a little bit hesitant at the beginning, because I felt that was someone's sacred space, and I didn't want to violate them. But he said, no, it'll be okay. So we went in, and we sat in one of the pews, and eventually the pastor came out, and he noticed I was native. I wasn't from the area, and he had a lot of questions. Just the typical, where you from, what kind of Indian are you, that kind of thing. And so we're having a really good visit. And he said, "Oh, wait, I hate to interrupt you, but turn around and look behind you." So we turned around and looked behind us, and there was this beautiful rose window up above the front entrance, and it just struck me. I was drawn into it for almost eternally, basically. And that experience really got me to thinking, in terms of Hopi culture, we have weavers, we have textiles, we have basketry, we have kachina doll carvings, we have jewelers today and painters, but there are no stained glass artists. No one is doing it. So I went back home, thought more about it, and said, this is another venue that we could open up to our tribal members. So that's the intention that I had going into this, not necessarily just for me, but so that it could spread out to other Hopi people. So I invested in a $3 glass cutting wheel and some how-to books, and bought a little bit of scrap glass, and basically I learned how to do that on my own. And I had a lot of success with it. But the idea was that, number one, it was not part of our cultural history, other than the use of obsidian for projectile movements, because obsidian is a rudimentary form of glass, but it wasn't anything that I saw in archaeology that was aesthetic. I mean, you could call it an arrowhead aesthetic up to a point, but primarily its function is something else. So that's how I got into stained glass. And I was in upstate New York in Corning another year, and I saw glass blowers. And boom, I had a second vision. And again, I wanted to get younger people, Hopi people, involved in this new meaning. And so that's why I got into glass blowing as well. And I took a 1-week workshop in Tucson about 20 years ago. And that 40 hours is about the extent of my formal training in glass blowing. And everything else I just learned through trial and error.
Great. What a fantastic story. We have a question from Mary asking about the butterfly panel and where she can see it. It is currently on exhibit at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture up on the hill, not at IAIA. So clearly Indigenous will be on exhibit through the spring, and we do encourage you to come check out 2 of Ramson's amazing pieces in the exhibit. We have another question that's come in from Richardson asking, I know you were a poet. What similarities and differences are there between your glass and your poetry? Which is a great question.
So, as I understand the question is, it's like the connection between the poetry and the glasswork.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, poetry came about for me from writing, having a semester in creative writing up at Goddard. And it came about because I was homesick. And the mentor that I worked with at the time for this first semester up there just encouraged me to start journaling. And out of the journaling came just ideas and images that he was really drawn to. And so he started to guide me towards writing poetry. And so I gave it a go. And I just started writing poetry from not necessarily an academic or a classical, the classical idea of what poetics are, but just words and ideas and language from my own background. And I just started just kind of playing with words. And after I graduated, about a year later, I published a book called Silent Winds. And a lot of the images that I use in poetry, again, are all landscapes. It's all different aspects of Hopi life, because the Hopi culture has an animistic worldview. We tend to look at everything as being alive or having some kind of a conscious energy to it. So I wrote a lot of poems that were directed to that line of thinking. And then subsequently, I wrote another book of poetry called Ascending the Reed, which directly alluded to the emergence, because the book cover even is like that. The lower half is white, and the upper half of the book cover is like a turquoise color. So the white area symbolizes the third world below us, and then the upper turquoise area represents the fourth world where we're on now. So we were ascending the reed. And the theme of that book was to look at more things that other people would call mythical or not real, but things that were real for me in terms of stories, in terms of the cultural mythology. And it's around that point where I started to look at myself, and I started to look at being honest with myself as an individual. And so there are some poems in there that speak to that, about dealing with my own identity and dealing with what I was raised with, as opposed to how things actually work. Because you can have a very romantic and stereotypical view of Hopi culture, but that's an ideal. It's not necessarily the real experience. So those were things that I was grappling with, coming to terms. And then the third book, called Drifting Through Ancestral Dreams, was a sort of culmination of the previous two books, and just looked at the idea of, okay, this is where I've been, here's where I am now, and where do I see myself down the road. So that's kind of how it changed over time, how my direction in life changed over time. And then one of those books was translated into the French language, and it was distributed in France. So when I got my copy, it was in the French language, and it's nice to have, but I haven't read it yet. But the connection between the poetry and the glass, again, is it's exemplified by that idea of stillness. Joseph Campbell had this experience about stillness while he was running, and he was a great runner. His body was in movement, but it was that calm, it was that going inward that took him to a totally different place. And that's what the poetry and the glass does for me. It's all outside movement, but on the inside, you're just in that place where you kind of meld into the universe. You just kind of become a part of the grand design.
Yeah. And one of the things that you said while we were prepping for this conversation, and that you said at the beginning of your presentation, is this sense of calm within the storm. And I think that's so powerful and so clear in your artistic works as well. And so I have a similar question, but it is about the impact of your training and background in sociology and how that impacts your outlook and artistic practice.
Well, I've always been interested in people, but actually, I started at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff as a pre-med student, but obviously that was not the plan for me. And so I transitioned eventually over the years to doing a lot of Kachina doll carving. So I kind of entered the art world being a Kachina doll carver. But as time went on, I just started to think about world events and events that were happening in my own culture, in my own community, and even in my own family. And that just got me to thinking about different things. And so I was an armchair sociologist for a while. But once I started getting an interest and gaining an interest in human behavior, it just changed directions for me academically. And for me, when I try and communicate concepts and ideas of sociology, and I'll introduce the idea to third, fourth graders, and I just basically share with them this idea that, well, a culture is a group of people who live and work together. I mean, that's pretty simple and straightforward. But to me, the bottom line of sociology is trying to answer the question, what compels people to do and say the things that they do? not only as individuals, but going like the family unit to the community, in my case, to the culture or the tribe, and then humankind. And it's really, for me, I just have a personal interest in this, and it helps me to sort out why people do the things that they do, why they react to different situations in the way they do. And a lot of it, for me personally, and this is purely theoretical now, it boils down to a lack of identity, self-identity, which then leads into that idea of self-worth or the lack of self-worth. But some of it is fear-based. We're just not sure of ourselves in certain situations. And once you break that mold, once you break through that, the world becomes a totally different place. And so studying cultures is really interesting for me. Firstly, what I found is Hopi values and beliefs are similar to Shintoism in Japan and also to Sikhism in India. The worldviews and their approach to life and what they deem as valuable and important for them is very similar to Hopi. So it helps me to find connections in that way. And there are plenty of connections out there. We just have to be willing to break ourselves down into our basic parts and reassemble ourselves so that we're more honest and open-minded with ourselves. And then your worldview changes.
Thank you for sharing that. That was a fabulous insight. I don't see any more questions from the audience at this point. So I will ask one of my own. I absolutely love hearing about how artists use museum collections. And your Mimbres project at New Mexico State seemed fantastic. And I was wondering what value you see in museum collections, and if there have been other instances where you have worked with museums before.
Oh, yeah. Well, I believe that museums in general are a critical part of the world because they are the maintainers of the continuum of what life is for a variety of people. From there's like the fire engine museum, right? Or I don't know if the World Records Museum in Roswell. I mean, it's a different kind of a museum, but it's still maintaining a continuum in the different genres of life. I just feel that museum collections, number one, are really helpful to artists and other people, simply because they are telling the story of people before them. I come from a very tactile culture, and for me, the Mimbres pottery was a good example. When you're looking at collections in a museum, you're needing to wear white gloves, which creates a barrier between you and the person who created it. Okay, so this is how we connect with that artist 300-400 years ago, is by touching, because their bare hands touch that clay. And by touching my bare hands to that piece of clay, there's a connection that happens there. It may be esoteric, but nonetheless, it's a connection that you make with this person. Personally, for me, I've grown from it because I can look at a picture on the web omnivorous pot, but not really have a clue as to its size and its dimensions and to the texture and everything. So if I can actually go into collections and look at it, then I get more. I can absorb more into it. If I look at work at artists that I know, automatically that triggers memories of a conversation that you may have had with a fellow artist 30 years ago. Just by looking at a painting or a piece of work that they did, you remember that person. And as long as we remember people who have gone on into another existence, they're still here with us. I believe that the only time a person dies is when they're not remembered. So to me, museum collections are critical. We can't afford to not have them. That's where I'm.
Yes. And I think from my perspective, that is their greatest value, is for contemporary artists to learn from and connect with. We only have a few minutes left. Is there anything else that you want to talk with MIAC audiences about?
No, clearly Indigenous exhibit. That's the thing to do whenever you have some time. It's a great exhibit. I sat through the entire video cycle twice over, just listening to other artists talk about their work and how they feel about it, their approaches to it. But the art pieces themselves, it's really beautiful. It has a lot of impact. To me, it shows you that Native American artists are not stuck in the culture. We're branching out. We're trying new mediums. We're showing the world that we are more than just Native artists.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. So go up there and check it out. It's great. It's a great exhibit.
Wonderful. So thank you everybody for joining us this morning. And thank you so much, Ramson, for being here with us today. I appreciate all of you spending your mornings with us, and thank you.